Chapter 1. Congratulations. You're 6 weeks pregnant. When I received the call from the hospital, I couldn't hold back the tears of joy. 8 years of trying to conceive, countless failures. I thought I'd never have the chance to experience the joy of having a child, the result of our love. But now, just before our 8th wedding anniversary, I have received such amazing news. I couldn't wait to tell Paul. I tried calling him several times, but he didn't answer. Suppressing my excitement, I decided to continue selecting furniture for our new home. We had bought a villa a year ago, finished renovating it 2 months ago, and now all that was left was the interior decorating. After choosing most of the furniture, I suddenly remembered that I'd left the keys to the storage room of our old house at the new home. So I drove over to pick them up. As soon as I opened the door, a pair of hot pink high heels caught my eye. I froze. They were clearly not my shoes. Countless thoughts flooded my mind, but I forced myself to stay calm and followed the sound of voices upstairs. Paul, I've never forgotten you all these years. The woman's voice was soft and unfamiliar. Then why did you leave? If you hadn't gone, I wouldn't have had to marry Lisa. That was Paul's voice. Do you know how I've endured all these years? Now, every time I look at her face, I feel sick. As soon as I transfer all the assets, I'll divorce her. Then, we'll never have to be apart again. Hearing those words, I stood frozen in place. I never imagined that the man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years could be plotting against me like this. Just 2 days ago, he held me in his arms, promising to always be good to me and love me forever. In that moment, my heart broke. The pain so intense I could barely breathe. I took a deep breath and crept closer. Through the slightly open door, I could clearly see what was happening inside. Paul was holding a woman tightly in his arms, their clothes scattered across the floor. When I recognized the woman's face, my body went rigid. It was Zoe, Paul's first love. Years ago, she had left him to go abroad, and now she had returned. My thoughts came crashing back as I saw Zoe kiss him. Overcome with desire, the two of them fell onto the bed. I couldn't describe how I felt as I watched them, as if I was torturing myself by witnessing their intimacy. It wasn't until I heard Paul repeatedly say "I love you" to Zoe that I finally accepted the truth. Everything he had done for me was an act. Slowly regaining my composure, I pushed down the emotions welling up inside me, took out my phone, and secretly recorded a video of their entanglement. I also took a few photos where their faces were clearly visible. After I finished, I left the villa in a daze. I drove aimlessly, my mind consumed by memories of the years Paul and I had spent together. When I started university, I met Paul, the boy I had secretly admired since my younger years. It was love at first sight. After silently harboring my feelings for a year, I found out that Paul was dating Zoe. I had no choice but to bury my emotions deep inside. It wasn't until the year we graduated that I heard from others that Paul and Zoe had broken up. I thought my chance had finally come. I pursued Paul relentlessly, staying by his side. I used all my connections and resources to help him achieve his life goals. And together, we started a company. Later, Paul proposed to me. I thought he had finally been moved by my dedication and had fallen in love with me. We quickly got married, and our life together was perfect. Or so it seemed. In just 3 years, I helped him grow the company to the point of going public. Paul told me I had worked hard all those years and suggested I stay home to rest. I went along with it, becoming the perfect supportive wife. But I never imagined that his kindness was part of his plan, a step in his scheme to transfer our joint assets. I pulled over to the side of the road, feeling utterly lost. Nearly 8 years of marriage, and all of Paul's promises had turned into lies. And to think, I was about to tell him about the pregnancy as a surprise. How foolish I was. Just then, my phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my former assistant from the company. When I answered, her tone was urgent. "Sis, why did you sell your shares? The company's going through a restructuring and acquisition. The stock price is going to soar. And if you sell now, you'll lose a lot." I was stunned. What? I never said I was selling. Boss Paul said so at the board meeting. She whispered. I just thought something seemed off. "Sis, you should be careful." With that, she quickly hung up. As her words sunk in, I immediately understood. Paul was already starting to move assets, and he was trying to swallow my share too. He really was a master manipulator, leaving no room for decency. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped home. This husband of mine, I couldn't keep him any longer. But the baby. I gently touched my belly. It had been so difficult for me to get pregnant. If I lost this child, I might never have another chance. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I would keep the baby, and I would take back every bit of what was rightfully mine. As for Paul, that scumbag, he would learn what it felt like to be betrayed. Chapter 2. Looking at the wedding photo in the living room, all I could feel was disgust at Paul's bright smile. It seemed so fake. Without thinking, I grabbed a nearby ornament and hurled it at the photo. Maybe it was the early stage of pregnancy, but I quickly became drowsy and lay down on the bed. Before long, I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by the sound of Paul coming home. As I opened my eyes, I saw him leaning in to kiss me. The thought of those lips having kissed another woman made me feel utterly disgusted. Just thinking about it made me nauseous, and I leaned over the bed, gagging. Paul didn't expect such a strong reaction from me and quickly grabbed some water from the nearby table. "What's wrong? Is it your stomach acting up again?" Back when we first got together, I had worked endlessly to help Paul ease his burden, working day and night to find clients and manage business. That led to my stomach issues. I was surprised he still remembered. In a way, it was a relief. At least I didn't have to worry about revealing my pregnancy and getting caught up in a complicated situation. "I'm fine, honey. I was just a bit tired today and didn't have time to eat, so my stomach is hurting a little." I hid my disgust and lay back down, pretending nothing was wrong. "As long as you're okay. You haven't eaten yet, right? I'll make you some porridge. Lie down and rest, and I'll call you when it's ready." Paul stroked my hair gently before heading to the kitchen. I forced a smile at Paul, but as soon as he left, my smile faded. I could hear the clanging of pots and pans from the kitchen. Paul was making porridge. I lay in bed, my thoughts drifting far away. I didn't even notice when Paul came back into the room. "The porridge is ready." I nodded and followed him to the dining table. On the table was a bowl of millet porridge, along with a small plate of pickles. "Honey, I remember the villa is fully renovated now, right? Why don't we move in a few days? Maybe a change of environment will help us with our baby plans." Paul froze for a moment, clearly caught off guard by my sudden mention of the villa. He looked visibly flustered but quickly regained his composure. "Yeah, it's ready, but there's a bit of an issue. We might need to wait a little longer." I sneered inwardly. "An issue? More like he's afraid I'll discover something. Did the workers cut corners? I'll go check tomorrow." "You're busy with work, so you don't have to go back and forth." I had to suppress my disgust and act like a loving wife, to keep Paul from getting suspicious. "Your health isn't great. You don't need to worry about such trivial things. Don't you trust your husband?" Paul held my hand, putting on an act as if he was really looking out for me. If I hadn't seen him and Zoe together with my own eyes, his words might have moved me. "Since that's the case, I'll leave it to you. I'm really looking forward to the day we can move in." With that, the conversation ended. I didn't want to talk to Paul anymore, so I quietly focused on eating the porridge. After finishing the bowl of hot porridge, my stomach felt much better. Seeing that I had finished, Paul voluntarily took on the task of washing the dishes, while I returned to the bedroom. After a while, Paul lay down beside me. He turned over and wrapped his arms around me, his hands wandering inappropriately over my body. A wave of disgust surged through me, and I instinctively slapped his hand away. The sharp sound of the slap echoed loudly in the quiet night. My reaction was sudden, and Paul seemed caught off guard. "Lisa?" I forcefully pulled away from his embrace, my face full of contempt in the darkness. "I don't feel well. Let's just go to sleep early." Paul didn't say anything for a moment, and after a while, I sensed him lying down next to me. The next morning, Paul got up early, but this time, I didn't prepare a lavish breakfast for him like I used to. Instead, I slept in until late morning. After getting enough rest, I felt much better. After all, I had something far more important to take care of today. I placed an order for a private investigator using my phone and arranged to meet at a cafe. Half an hour later, I sat face to face with the private investigator. both of us in silence. Finally, I broke the awkward tension. Are you the private investigator I hired? I looked him over, then asked, have you graduated yet? It wasn't that I didn't trust him, but he seemed so young. Don't worry, we're all professionals. Hearing that, my worries dissipated. I pulled out the photos of Paul and Zoe from my bag. Since I had made up my mind, I realized that a lot of things had already been telling me the truth all along. Like this photograph, Paul had kept it in perfect condition all this time. When we first got married, I had seen this photo in the study. I still remember how Paul had explained it to me back then. When I found the photo, Paul had been frantic, explaining that they were just friends. He even promised to get rid of it. But now I knew it was all lies. Looking back, I felt foolish for believing him. But at least now, there was still time to make things right. I steadied my thoughts and pointed to the photo on the table. He's my husband, and he's cheating on me. I need you to follow them. Tell me when they meet and what they do. In full detail. I need evidence to prove his infidelity. Do you understand? The investigator nodded. I was pleased with his professionalism. He didn't pry or ask unnecessary questions. I also want to know how they reconnected. Money isn't an issue. If there's any problem, contact me immediately. We exchanged contact information, and I left the cafe with a renewed sense of determination to avoid being discovered by Paul. I purposely bought a new phone just for contacting Diego. For the next few days, everything seemed calm. Paul remained busy with work as usual, and the rest of his time was spent meeting with Zoe in secret. There was no news from Diego's side either, and just when I couldn't contain my impatience anymore, I received a message from him. I read the report carefully, and I had to admit, Diego was quite skilled at his job. What shocked me, though, was that Paul had reconnected with Zoe 2 years ago. Not only that, but it was around the same time that Paul had started asking me to step back from the company. Most people in the company were now Paul's loyal followers. The report also mentioned that Paul was planning to buy out my shares and give them to Zoe. As I read that line, a bitter laugh escaped my lips, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Look at that, this is the man I've loved for so many years. Sis, I've got some photos I need to give you. When would you be available to meet? Send me the address. I wiped away my tears. If Paul wants to be ruthless, then I won't hold back either. Half an hour later, I arrived at the location Diego had sent me. This time, Diego was dressed much more discreetly. If it hadn't been for the fact that he was wearing the same outfit as when we met last time, I might not have recognized him. We sat across from each other, and he placed a stack of photos in front of me. I stared at them for a long time before finally picking them up. It only took a few pictures to make my breathing quicken. The photos were all of Paul and Zoe together. Hotels, restaurants, and even banquets I hadn't known about, all of them featured Zoe by Paul's side. The further I looked, the more alarmed I became. The last few photos were even more familiar. The background was the villa in the east of the city. The one Paul had recently claimed had renovation issues. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, then grabbed my phone and transferred the payment to Diego. It was his hard-earned fee. Keep watching them. Let me know when there's more news. After Diego left, I finally let my hands rest on the table. Had Diego still been there, he would have noticed that my hands were trembling slightly. Paul and Zoe, what a pair! Wait and see. I won't let the two of you have your way. Chapter 3. I'm Zoe. A friend request caught my attention. I stared at the notification on my phone for a while, hesitating, but eventually, I accepted the request. However, the other party didn't say anything. 3 days from now, it will be my birthday. When Paul and I first got together, I rarely received any gifts from him. At that time, our business was just starting to take off, and we couldn't afford anything expensive. Paul had promised me that once the business was successful, he would make it up to me. I pitied Paul for how hard he worked, so I never asked for anything. But this time, I'm determined to make Paul splurge on me. After all, everything he spends is part of our marital assets, and if I don't spend it, he'll give it to another woman. When Paul came home, I brought it up. Honey, my birthday is coming up. Have you thought about what you're going to get me? Paul's body stiffened when he heard my words. Of course I've thought about it. Didn't you mention that you wanted the new handbag from X store? I've already ordered it. I was planning to surprise you. I was a little surprised. X store is a luxury brand, and just one bag costs over $1 million. But this kind of money is nothing to Paul anymore. Feigning excitement, I said, "You're so sweet. Honey, I'll be looking forward to it. Oh, and I've been resting for so long. How about I go back to the company and help you out? There's so much going on at the company, and I've noticed you've lost weight recently." It disgusted me to play this false role, but it was the only way to keep Paul from getting suspicious. "No need. Honey, you went through tough times with me before, and now that life is good. You just need to enjoy it at home," Paul said, holding my hand with that fake look of concern. Seeing him like this made me feel utterly repulsed. Smiling, I pulled my hand away and jokingly asked, "What? Are you afraid I'll discover you've got a mistress at the company?" Right after I asked, Paul's expression froze. I was taken aback. "No way. I only said it in jest, but could it be true? If that's really the case, why hasn't Diego uncovered anything?" Paul forced a smile. "How could that be? I'm just worried about you getting too tired. Your position is still vacant, and if you want, you can come back to the company anytime." I was surprised at how quickly he agreed. Since that's the case, there's no need to waste any more words. The next morning, I left the house with Paul. He was clearly surprised when he realized I was actually going to the company with him. Maybe he thought I had just been joking the night before and didn't expect me to be serious about it. "Are you really going to the office?" Paul asked as we stood together in the elevator. After a long silence, he finally spoke up. I smiled slightly, amused that he couldn't hide his discomfort so quickly. In the elevator, I casually took his arm, pretending not to notice how tense he had become. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out ahead of him. The receptionist looked surprised to see me and greeted me warmly. "Lisa, it's been a while. What brings you here?" When I had left the company, Paul had made some sort of arrangement with the staff, though I wasn't exactly sure what story he had told them. "I'm back to work," I said with a smile before heading toward my old office. Though I hadn't been to the company in quite some time, my office remained just as it had been. That pleased me. Returning to the company was the first step in my plan. This company's success today was largely built on my hard work. Paul had merely reaped the rewards of my efforts. When it came to business, I had always been more talented than him. On my first day back, I could already sense the undercurrents of tension within the company. I had to admit, Paul was quite skilled at winning people over. In the year I had been away, he had managed to sway many of the company's senior employees to his side. Recently, the company had been preparing for a major bidding project, and as far as I knew, Paul was still clueless about how to approach it. This project was my opportunity, no matter how much Paul had promised his followers. Everything depended on the company's future development, and I was confident that I could do better than him. Over the following days, I threw myself into the bidding project, working harder than ever. I became so busy that, some nights, I returned home after Paul had already fallen asleep, and in the mornings, I left before he even woke up. I led a team of new employees on the project, promising them generous bonuses. After a month of hard work, the project was finally beginning to take shape. The support for me within the company grew stronger with each passing day, and I knew that Paul was starting to get nervous. Chapter 4. In just over a month, I secured the bidding project, bringing significant profits to the company. I made sure to reward my colleagues who worked with me on the project, giving them a generous bonus. The total amount reached millions, but considering the revenue the project generated for the company, this bonus was nothing in comparison. When Paul found out that I had given out such large bonuses, he was displeased, although he only hinted at his dissatisfaction through subtle comments. After that, it was time for my birthday. On the morning of my birthday, Paul made me a bowl of longevity noodles. "Happy birthday, honey. I've booked us a candlelit dinner tonight to celebrate. I'll come pick you up after work," Paul said, holding me in his arms. I didn't resist. "I need to go to the hospital today, so I won't be going to the office," I said softly, my voice muffled as I remained in his embrace. Without any hesitation or sentiment, I gently pushed Paul away, smiling as I saw him out the door. I had plans to meet Diego today, and I also needed to go to the hospital for a prenatal checkup. The baby inside me was now almost 4 months along. At home, I had been careful not to wear any tight-fitting clothes, but if anyone looked closely, they would start to notice that I was beginning to show. It seemed I needed to speed things up. At the appointed time, I arrived at the cafe. I had been so busy with work that I had kept in touch with Diego primarily through WeChat. He mentioned that he had found some additional information. I spotted Diego entering the cafe with his bag, and he sat down across from me, his face beaming with excitement. "Sis, I guarantee the latest information I've found will be of great use to you." With that, Diego placed a file in front of me. The title was striking: Asset Transfer. What was Paul planning? As I continued reading, my shock grew. I quickly gathered the papers and tucked them into my bag. "Thank you. Keep watching them," I said as I left, not forgetting to transfer Diego his payment. As I left the cafe, I felt overwhelmed. Paul was planning to transfer all his assets. What could his motive be? Just as I was deep in thought, my phone buzzed again. There was no message, only a video from Diego. I opened it to find a man and a woman engaged in something explicit. The two people were Paul and Zoe. Just one glance was enough to make my stomach churn with disgust. I quickly saved the video. This would serve as evidence for my case against Paul. Not wanting to dwell on these unsettling matters, I hailed a taxi and headed to the hospital. Before leaving home, I had already messaged a friend to schedule my prenatal appointment. When I arrived at the hospital, I barely had to wait before being called in for my checkup. Alice, my friend from high school, was the one handling my appointment. Despite the many years since we graduated, we had always kept in touch. "Congratulations are in order. From the scans, it looks like the baby is very healthy. Just remember to come in regularly for your checkups," Alice said warmly. I nodded, gently placing my hand on my belly, smiling with affection. We exchanged a few words of small talk before I left, knowing she had other patients waiting. After returning home, I rested for a while. During that time, I received a message from Paul. He informed me that he'd be working late and asked me to go to the restaurant by myself. That evening, I waited alone at the restaurant for a long time. My calls to Paul went unanswered. The waiter came by multiple times, asking if I was ready to order, but each time I still couldn't reach Paul. Finally, I ended the call, apologized to the waiter, and left the restaurant. As soon as I checked WeChat, the first thing I saw was Zoe's post in her moments. It was a blurry photo accompanied by a vague caption. I told him it was just a little scratch. No need for the hospital, but he insisted on taking me and staying with me until now. The background of the photo was clearly a hospital, and in the corner, there was a familiar figure. It was Paul, still wearing the same clothes from this morning. No wonder he wasn't answering my calls or messages. He was at the hospital with his precious first love. But surprisingly, I didn't feel anything. If it hadn't been for the need to keep up appearances with Paul, I wouldn't have agreed to have dinner with him in the first place. I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. Instead, I sat in the dim living room, waiting. As the night wore on, Paul never messaged me. I knew Zoe's post was aimed at me. She wanted me to see it. I opened the post again and left a comment beneath it. "Congrats! But doesn't the man in your photo look a lot like my husband?" After sending the comment, I tossed my phone aside. I knew Paul would see it. All I had to do now was wait for him to come home. Sure enough, half an hour later, Paul walked through the door. He still had a faint scent of perfume on him, the same scent Zoe always wore. The first thing Paul did when he came in was confront me, as if I had done something unforgivable. "What's the meaning of what you posted under Zoe's moments? I know forgetting your birthday was my mistake, but why are you taking it all out on her?" Paul kept saying Zoe's name, over and over, as if they were the ones who truly belonged together. "So, she really was talking about you." "I just thought the figure looked familiar," I said, feigning surprise. My expression was so genuine that it would be hard to doubt me. Paul stared at me for a moment, and finally, his tone softened. "I'm sorry. Honey, I didn't mean to forget your birthday. You know Zoe just got back to the country and doesn't have many friends." Of course. I know, I replied with the same smile on my face. But I had no desire to continue this conversation with Paul any further. In the past few weeks at the company, I have done a lot. Now, it was time to tie up all the loose ends. I've made plans with Alice. We agreed to meet after her shift. So I'm going to the hospital to see her. I lied smoothly. Paul didn't suspect a thing and even offered to drive me there. I politely declined his offer and left the house quickly. The truth was, I hadn't made any plans with Alice. I just couldn't bear to stay in that suffocating house any longer. Instead, I booked a room at a hotel far from home. During the day, I continued going to the company as usual. And at night, I found various excuses not to return home. I had someone draft up a property transfer agreement, tricking Paul into signing it by telling him it was related to insurance. Now, everything was in place. While Paul was at work, I moved all my belongings out of the house. I found the deed to the villa and immediately put it up for sale. The villa had been bought for around 8 million yuan, and to ensure a quick sale, I lowered the asking price. In just 3 days, it was sold. However, I negotiated with the buyer to hand over the keys in a month. A month was all I needed to finalize everything. Chapter 5. I gathered all the videos of Paul and Zoe together, along with various incriminating photos. Everything was meticulously organized. I informed Diego that there was no need to continue keeping an eye on them. After transferring the final payment, Diego's job was done. The rest of this was now my responsibility. Last night, Paul told me he would be going on a business trip to a nearby city for a few days. I took full advantage of his absence to clean house at the company, removing all of Paul's loyalists from their positions. Despite their dissatisfaction, there was nothing they could do. Once I laid out the evidence of their corruption and bribery, they had no choice but to slink away in defeat. Within just 3 days, the company underwent a complete overhaul. Now, everyone left was loyal to me, and Paul, even though he technically owned the company, was nothing more than a figurehead. All that remained was for Paul to return. Zoe, who had been lingering in my thoughts for so long, was finally someone I decided to deal with directly. This was the first time I arranged to meet her. It was time to wrap things up. I laid out all the evidence of Paul's infidelity in front of her, including the more intimate photos she had taken with him. Zoe's expression changed dramatically as she saw the evidence, and I couldn't help but feel satisfied with the result. All the money spent was worth it. I'll give you a month to return all the money Paul has spent on you. As for the villa you're living in, it's already been sold. Someone will be coming to collect the keys in a few days, so you've got a little time to find yourself a new place. Zoe looked at me, shocked. She had assumed that I was a meek, harmless woman with no fight in me. That was the reason she had flaunted their relationship so boldly in her moments, making sure only I could see her posts. Does Paul know about any of this? Zoe asked, trying to keep her composure, but the tremble in her hands betrayed her fear. He'll find out soon enough, I replied coldly, standing up to leave without hesitation. There wasn't much time left for me. Zoe would run straight to Paul with this information. But it didn't matter. I had already booked my plane ticket long ago. After parting ways with Zoe, I headed straight to the airport. Over the past few weeks, I had gradually shipped away all my belongings. I had no sentimental attachment to anything, and what wasn't necessary had already been thrown away. 3 hours later, the plane landed. My phone was flooded with missed calls and messages, all from Paul. As soon as I turned on my phone, Paul's call came through. I smirked before answering. Honey, where did you go? Let me explain the situation with Zoe. It's not what you think, Paul began to babble. I cut him off. Paul, let's get a divorce. I've already filed the papers with the court, so you'll receive the divorce agreement soon. If you're smart, you'll sign it quickly. Dragging this out won't benefit you. Oh, by the way, did you receive the little surprise I left for you? You really make me sick, I added. There was sudden silence on the other end of the line. After a long pause, Paul's voice came back, hoarse and broken. You knew all along, didn't you? I didn't bother to answer directly. Paul, every single day with you has disgusted me. Before he could reply, I hung up. Chapter 6. A month later, I finally received the divorce agreement. During that time, Paul constantly tried to win my forgiveness, but it was far too late. By the time I left, I had already taken care of everything with the company. Paul was left with nothing. He didn't even have a place to live. Perhaps my firm stance wore him down in the end, and he eventually agreed to the divorce. Since he was found guilty of infidelity during the marriage, the court ruled that Paul had to leave the marriage with nothing. As for Zoe, she had to mortgage the house and sell the luxury goods Paul had bought her just to pay back what she owed. Once the divorce was finalized, I cut all ties with both of them, deleting and blocking their contact information from my life. With everything settled, I could finally focus on what mattered, preparing for the arrival of my baby. Being a first-time mother, I worried about doing things right, so I spared no expense in hiring a top-notch maternity nurse to care for me and the baby after birth. 5 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. To this day, Paul remains oblivious to the fact that I was pregnant. I never intended to tell him anyway. This child is mine, and Paul is nothing more than a fleeting chapter in my life. After my daughter was weaned, I opened a branch of my company here. I hired a maternity nurse to take care of my daughter while I balanced running the business. At times, I would go days, even weeks, without seeing her. But fortunately, the business grew stable, and I found trustworthy people to manage it. I gradually began to let go and spent more and more time at home with my daughter. 3 years later, I finally returned home. It was the first time I'd been back in years. I left the company in the hands of trustworthy people. This trip back home was primarily for business, but I never expected that on my first day back, I'd run into Paul. I hadn't seen him in years. He looked gaunt and much more disheveled than before. His eyes lit up when he saw me, but then his gaze fell on the little girl in my arms. "Is that your daughter?" Paul asked, his voice filled with curiosity. I tensed up immediately. If you looked closely, you could see traces of Paul in my daughter's features. Worried that he might notice, I spoke quickly to my daughter. "Sweetheart, say goodbye to the uncle. We need to go." "Goodbye, uncle," my daughter said sweetly in her soft, childlike voice. I hurried past Paul, carrying my daughter with me, my heart pounding as I feared he might follow us. This time, I only stayed for 3 days to take care of business matters. Once everything was settled, I took my daughter and headed home. On the way back, I received more messages from Paul. They were full of regret, but I didn't bother reading them in detail. I simply blocked him, not wanting to waste another second of my life on him. With my daughter in my arms, we boarded our flight. At the gate, I ran into someone familiar, Diego. "Hey, sis, long time no see. I didn't expect to bump into you here," he said with a smile. Chapter 7. On the plane, Diego kept my daughter entertained, and she seemed to enjoy playing with him. After we landed, I suggested we grab a meal together, and Diego happily accepted. Seeing I had a lot of luggage, he offered to carry my daughter, who surprisingly didn't mind at all. We ate together, and after dinner, Diego said goodbye and went on his way. But after that, I started running into Diego more often, in all sorts of places. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but over time, I began to suspect that Diego had other intentions. It wasn't until one night, after I had too much to drink, that one of my colleagues called Diego to help me. In my hazy state, I could have sworn I heard Diego confess his feelings. The next day, however, Diego acted as if nothing had happened, and I didn't bring it up either. I didn't want to break that unspoken understanding between us. Having been through a failed marriage, I now knew one thing for certain: the only person I could truly trust was myself. And with that knowledge, I was confident that my future would be bright, and that I would forge a path to success.